My student from Germany, Carsten Wergen, studying the tourism industry in Broome, tells a funny story quite well. He's finally gained access to the Shire president. I will call him Shirley to protect the innocent. Shirley, to ask questions about matters economic. Like many provincial political minnows, Shirley is self-absorbed and doesn't really listen to what the anthropologist is talking about. Tourism won't save Broome, he blusters. So Carsten wonders what he means and has to ask what it is exactly about Broome that needs to be saved. But Shirley carries on with his mantra as if he had nothing else to say. The tourism industry can't save Broome. And so this is the soundbite that Carsten has ringing in his ears as he leaves the office. Tourism won't save Broome. Tourism won't save Broome. And he still doesn't know why Broome needs to be saved, and reflects that it's been a quite sustainable place for Yarra and Juukan people to live in for innumerable generations. But yes, you guessed it, heavy industry is the saviour Shirley didn't mention, mainly mining of various sorts. But what a fabulous irony. As we speak, many others are up in arms about fracking by Buru Energy precisely because of the threat to Broome's underground water supply. The potential saviours are also the potential destroyers. The mining industry is indeed godlike in its indiscriminate and universal power. Our fate is in the hands of that industry, and I'd like to be able to be more ironic about that. The narrative that has brought us to this pretty pass in the Anthropocene of today is absolutely connected with the word industry. I'm talking about the Industrial Revolution, of course. Various key concepts in the economics of urbanisation and industrialisation through history are realigned in the story that has turned power over to the invisible hand of the market. I want to argue here today, as a humanist concerned with such things, that it's the economic narrative that has to be contested, a discourse composed with its impression of cold, hard calculation, along with airy science fiction fantasies and quasi-religious promises of a better future for all. And I want to anchor my counter-narrative in Broome as a kind of frontier resisting the onward march of the global culture of Western industrial modernity. Aboriginal land is still being colonised. So how do those who don't like being colonised respond? Or, more subtly, what is responding to what? Because I don't think what I think we're dealing with here as the age of industry morphs into the Anthropocene is not a fight between one group of people, the global corporations, and another group of people, but a clash of one kind of massive thing with another. It's not just about us narcissistic humans thinking we're at the centre of the universe. Far from it. So following Tim Morton, I shall have to call these massive things hyper-objects. The hyper-object is a catchy concept. That is, it catches you while you don't quite catch it. Morton first established it in a book called The Ecological Thought a few years ago, and his new book is called Hyper-Objects, Philosophy and Ecology After the End of the World. And it explains why everyone is affected by hyper-objects, even as they strive to deny their existence. Climate, natural oil reserves, the English language are all hyper-objects in that they cannot be grasped as simple objects, like this is supposedly simple. They're vast, you can't grab them, like English. Have you ever met English? No, well. But what you experience every day, like me now, are groping attempts to make meaning with words, or whispered lovers' words, and words digitised and zapped across the internet are materially quite different things, but they both belong to this hyper-object we call the English language. Another example, you feel the existence of global oil reserves each time you check while you're pumping gas, pumping petrol, how much the price has gone up. And you sense there's something to do with oil in the Middle East, with oil in Middle East conflicts, and how it makes people want to debate the hijab. It's getting into everything. So hyperobjects are persuasive and they don't allow you to rationally divide and resolve them with our human artefacts called science, politics and art. It doesn't work to say global warming is a purely scientific issue. You know, the science is in, folks, and the rest of you should shut up. Such an imperative would stop us treating it as ideological or related to voting patterns or indeed related to aesthetics and philosophy. But no amount of science or human willpower can make that happen because it's already here, says Morton, infiltrating every aspect of existence. Nor can any amount of science provide absolute 100% proof of causal connections. This, of course, gives skeptics and fossil fuel industries the same lack of certainty argument that big tobacco exploited in earlier debates. Morton asks how humans will react to the end of the modern world as we know it and to the new hyper-objective cosmos. You're walking out of the supermarket, he tells the story casually, and as you approach your car, a stranger calls out, "Hey, funny weather today," and with a due sense of caution, "Is she a global warming denier or not?" You reply, "Yes." And we've all experienced this kind of hesitation and apprehension about the weather. Innocent conversations about it seem to be no longer possible. Worries about the weather are a mere symptom of something huge, foreboding and ungraspable in its entirety. Climate is a hyperobject and global warming is its apocalyptic avatar. The world in the old sense is over because the weather, like nature, is no longer the neutral backdrop we can rely upon to stay put while we play out our little human dramas in front of it. If the hyperobject of global warming is imposing itself radically, and I'm convinced that it is because even the deniers can't stop talking about it, and our wisteria bloomed 2 weeks early last spring, then that old world of human foreground and natural background is gone. You're right, also, to get a sense of the ridiculous when you see on TV a sceptical captain of industry debating a greenie minister of religion as if their opinions really mattered. It's not the absent scientist on the panel that's the real concern. It's that the conceptual architecture of the world they share is the same as it was at the time of the Industrial Revolution, that they still share the same language of human mastery, hope, and redemptive adjustment. They occupy the same cliched world of a beautiful landscape painting, something like that one, that's a photograph though, which has forgotten all the violence that went into its creation, not just the painting, but the whole conceptual architecture. So I'm thinking about the contrast between the photo of the cyclone with its Turner-esque sublime and this Yukulji Napangati painting that captured Tim Morton when he was here. The cyclone looks like a mushroom cloud, or rather, it feels like it, with its end-of-the-world threat that so mobilised the post-World War II peace generation movement. And David Christian already cited Robert Oppenheimer in 1945, exploding the atom bomb, inventing another hyperobject without even knowing it. And this was underscored by his quoting of Shiva, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds." But in Sydney, Australia, in 2011, Morton looks at the work by Napangati in the gallery and he sees it, I quote, "surge toward me, locking onto my optic nerve and holding me in its force field." He was thus captured by the dreaming. He calls it the Aboriginal hyperobject, the dreaming. That's how he glosses it, saying, "It's impossible to leave the painting. Hairs standing up on my body, tears streaming down my face. Slowly, I tear myself away." So for Morton, the Napangati is a portal onto the Aboriginal hyperobject that almost sucks him down into its vortex. This Aboriginal hyperobject is just his gloss on the dreaming, or what they call the Bugaragara up in Broome. I could summon the most powerful concept mashing and poetics that I could write in English to give you my gloss on the dreaming and never get close. It exceeds description, which is why it's hyper and why it can't be destroyed or even trivialised successfully. It's waiting underneath the country. It persists through the country. You people try and dig a little bit more deep, said Paddy Rowe about the country north of Broome. You've been digging only white soil. Try and find the black soil inside. And he was deeply concerned about the activities of mining companies who dig without asking. They just went their own ways, he says in another story, and didn't know anything. So they must have knocked some stone over, because some stones, that snake, you know, and he laughs because he can only speak obliquely about the sacred stone. Outside, you can see it. And Paddy continues the story about an unusual cloud, like Leah's, reading the clouds. He tells a story about an unusual cloud that emerges out to sea over the reef. It tells him something has gone wrong in Luma country, where the oil company is, 200 kilometres away. And so he heads down there to find his countrymen. This is living country, is what any Aboriginal person from around Broome will tell you if they're anti-gas or anti-fracking, reminding me of a character in Reza Negarestani's cosmo-fiction Cyclonopedia, Complicity with Anonymous Materials, a very impenetrable book. In it, I've gleaned so far, there's a renegade Iranian archaeologist, Dr. Hamid Passani, who announced the Middle East is a sentient entity, it is alive, before disappearing under mysterious circumstances. The disordered notes he leaves behind, this is all in the novel, testify to an increasingly deranged preoccupation with oil as the rotting corpse of the sun and the lubricant of historical and political narratives. I'll just quote a bit from the novel, where oil is taking on this kind of living force. Once oil reaches its destination, the crusading war machines, whose first disposition is to be dynamic, will fuel up and assemble themselves with the oil and its derivatives. As the machines of the Western Enlightenment consume oil either by burning the blob or fattening up on the blob, the smuggled war machines start to activate and are chemically unbound. The nervous system and the chemistry of war machines smuggled through oil infused with the Western machines, feasting on oil unnoticed, as petroleum has already dissolved or refinedly emulsified them in itself as its chemical elements or its essential derivatives, Islamic ideologies, ambitions, implicit policies, socio-religious entities and formations. The publisher tells me he refused to have anything to do with an editor. But it's a fascinating book. Here we are, Global Subterranean Oil as Hyperobject is alive and changing history. It's out of control, calling the shots, telling the stories, even extending its influence to remote Australia and getting Woodside Petroleum and Buru Energy to go out finding more on the Dampier Peninsula, the Fitzroy River Valley, or out in the Western Desert. And make sure you call it natural resources, they're told, as if it comes for free, as if humans are distant from those resources, as if they're not at all complicit, to use Negarestani's concept. Calling material natural is modernity's way of idealising matter. It's just all stuff made of carbon atoms, the same anywhere in the world, so human attachments to it make no sense in this hyper-rationalisation for exploitability. But capitalists are canny. They know exactly which land they want to grab because this free stuff is there. And on the other side, Indigenous peoples of the world have sacred things in the country that attaches them exactly to places. But in the middle is a floating population of middle-class greenies, like me, with free-floating concepts of hope, nature, beauty, which are of no use or may be used sometimes wrongly, and a free-floating population of fly-in, fly-out workers. These are the people of the Holocene, not yet of the Anthropocene. They think they are free agents destined for transcendence. They dream of heavens above and new planetary homes should this world run out of resources. They've not yet come down to earth. Earthbound is what Bruno Latour calls it. People whose awareness comes from the knowledge of losing their territory, where they live and belong. With the Anthropocene, the atmosphere has changed as we try to debate something we can't fully grasp, yet we fear is changing things forever. The atmosphere of fear is what is held in common by the so-called left and right wings of politics alike, and it means we're no longer at all comfortable in that modern world so successfully critiqued by Latour, who caught the atmosphere. Postmodernity, in a way, has returned with a vengeance, this time with an ecological motor driving it, and it's having serious effects in our academic disciplines as the most fundamental base concepts crumble away. What we used to call social reality can no longer be taken for granted. Nature has been shown to be a European invention set up as a uniform backdrop to the interesting varieties of cultures we've been happily studying as variations within the equally dubious concept of the human. History can no longer be imagined unfolding on a timeline from the past towards the utopian unknown. Now there's a serious twist in time. Time is what comes crashing back towards us from the known future, as opposed to unfolding a utopian narrative forwards. So now the issue is not to have one final attempt to sustain the utopian narrative, but to best prepare for the most probable eventuality. And who will tell this story of preparedness for survival now that the world of the Industrial Revolution has ended, and with the Anthropocene we face up to the reality of being earthbound? In Negrestani's dystopian planetary novel, we found that it was the hyperobject oil that told, or is still telling, a powerful story that is as frighteningly real as it is science fiction. Earth as narrated from the nethermost point of view is how Negrestani summarised his project as he was writing it. And in Australia, I prefer to listen to, feel, be in attendance upon the Bugarragara. I know the Bugarragara had something to do with saving a powerful site called Wamadan, James Price Point, last year. Bugarragara is another hyperobject narrated from a nethermost point of view, or at least imminently in country. Indigenous being in country doesn't have utopian designs on the future because time is not working like that. Yet somehow, last April, the announcement was made, an alliance of Indigenous people and greenies and others managed to resist Woodside Petroleum, made things so uncomfortable for them on Gallarabulu country that, well, for business reasons as well, they packed up and left. A small battle won in an ongoing war. The country must have been telling the story that united the people, the bilbies, the dinosaur footprints, a spiritual being called Marala, the irili trees, the darial birds, black cockies. And if the Bugarragara was doing the narrating, maybe Woodside Petroleum, Buru Energy, the WA government and the Murdoch press are becoming bit players in the story it has to tell about survival. The country narrates is a sentence without an object, an intransitive sentence because the object is immaterial, contingent, complicit, but earthbound. The country narrates. But speaking of survival, I started with an image of an approaching cyclone, and I want to get quite practical now, no more of this crazy conceptual stuff, and tell you what to do to survive a cyclone. I didn't get to see what Anna's cyclone shelter looks like, but this is a meribelang, and you should dig yourself into the earth, build yourselves a meribelang, as instructed by Paddy Rowe, big enough for 5 or 6 people, with a little fire for warmth and cooking. Thanks very much. And reflects that it's been a quite sustainable place for Yarra and Jugun people to live in for innumerable generations. But yes, you guessed it, heavy industry is the saviour Shirley didn't mention, mainly mining of various sorts. But what a fabulous irony. As we speak, many others are up in arms about fracking by Buru Energy precisely because of the threat to Broom's underground, is what he means, and has to ask what it is exactly about Broome that needs to be saved. But Shirley carries on with his mantra as if he had nothing else to say. The tourism industry can't save Broome. And so this is the soundbite that Carsten has ringing in his ears as he leaves the office. Tourism won't save Broome. Tourism won't save Broome. And he still doesn't know why Broome needs to be saved. Tells a funny story quite well. He's finally gained access to the Shire President. I will call him Shirley to protect the innocent. Shirley, to ask questions about matters economic. Like many provincial political minnows, Shirley is self-absorbed and doesn't really listen to what the anthropologist is talking about. Tourism won't save Broome, he blusters. So Carsten won. My student from Germany, Carsten Bergen, studying the tourism industry in Broome, groundwater supply. The potential saviours are also the potential destroyers. The mining industry is indeed godlike in its indiscriminate and universal power. Our fate is in the hands of that industry, and I'd like to be able to be more ironic about that. The narrative that has brought us to this pretty pass in the Anthropocene of today is absolutely connected with the word industry.